6 weeks after Diana Webb walked out of the house on Sycamore Drive, with a court order, and the keys to a moving truck, Deon used the last $400 in an account she had never known existed to buy a fuel pump for a van that had not started in 14 months. He fixed the van himself in the backyard of a man he had known since he was 9 years old. 7 months later, he stood in front of a television camera on a street corner in southwest Atlanta. Diana was watching from the living room of the house that used to be theirs. She was not ready for what she saw. Deon Webb grew up on Halsted Street in the south side of Chicago in a house that smelled like motor oil, and WD-40 and something underneath that he could never name, but would recognize anywhere for the rest of his life. The smell came from the single-car garage attached to the left side of the house. Cracked concrete floor. A bare bulb on a cord. A pegboard on the wall, where every tool had its own outline traced in black marker, so you always knew what was missing and what was there. The garage belonged to his father, Earl Webb. Born 1951. 41 years under the hoods of other people's cars. Not at a dealership. Not at a chain shop. Earl Webb worked out of that garage on Halsted Street for 4 decades, writing every job in a spiral notebook, charging fair prices, never turning away a customer who said they were short this week, but would have it by Friday. He had a way of explaining things to people who did not know cars. He would wipe his hands on a red shop rag and crouch beside whoever was there, and point and say, "Here is what happened, and here is why, and here is what I am going to do about it." He never talked down to anyone. He never made a person feel foolish for not knowing what he knew. Deon was beside him in that garage from the time he could reach the workbench standing on an overturned milk crate. 5 years old, handing his father tools that were too heavy for his hand. Earl did not give him small tasks to keep him busy. He gave him real ones. "Hold this. Listen. Tell me what you hear when I turn it over." By 12, Deon could change a serpentine belt without being told the sequence. By 14, he had rebuilt a carburetor on a 1972 Buick Riviera that a neighbor had given up on, and when the engine turned over, the neighbor stood in the driveway with his mouth open, and Earl stood beside Deon with his arms folded, and said nothing for a moment, and then said, "That is what right looks like." Earl taught Deon how to fix cars. But he also taught him something else. Something that had nothing to do with torque or timing, or the particular sound a failing wheel bearing makes at highway speed. Anything broken can be fixed. People are the hard part. Deon heard that sentence more times than he could count. He heard it when a customer came in furious about a bill, and Earl talked to him for 20 minutes, until the man shook his hand, and came back the following month. He heard it the last morning he spent in that garage before he left for Atlanta. He heard it in the way his father put his hand on his shoulder, without saying anything else, and stepped back. Deon left at 23. A fleet maintenance job in Buckhead. Better money than the South Side could offer. He packed 2 bags and one other thing. The toolbox. Steel case. Latched on both sides. Handle worn smooth, from 30 years of mornings carrying it, from the house to the garage and back. Inside, every tool had a strip of white athletic tape around the handle, with 2 words written in black permanent marker. Earl Webb. His father's name on every single piece. Earl put the toolbox in the back seat himself. He did not make a speech. He stepped back from the car. Deon drove away, and watched his father in the rearview mirror standing at the end of the driveway, until the block curved, and he could not see him anymore. The toolbox went everywhere Deon went after that. Every apartment. Every job. Later in the corner of his own shop, and later still in the back of a van on roads his father never drove. He opened it every single day. He stopped seeing the names on the handles the way you stop seeing a scar, after enough years. The thing is always there. You just stop looking at it. He would start looking again. But not yet. Deon met Diana Reeves when he was 26. She was 23, finishing a degree in accounting at Georgia State. Precise. Kept a planner. Remembered numbers without writing them down. She listened to him talk about engines, without pretending to be interested in engines, and she was honest about that, which he appreciated. She said, "You love this in a way most people never love anything." He said, "It is the only thing that always makes sense." They married when Deon was 29. 60 guests. Diana's mother Gloria sat in the front row in a yellow dress, and smiled the smile of a woman who had made a calculation and decided to accept the result, without being satisfied by it. Gloria Reeves was 61 years old, retired school administrator, owner of a 4-bedroom house in Marietta she had paid off in full. She measured the worth of a man by the letters, after his name, and the floor he worked on. Deon had no letters after his name. He worked on concrete. She did not say this directly. She said it in other ways. She said it by asking Diana, at least twice a year, whether she had thought about encouraging Deon to get certified in something, with a business component. She said it by calling the shop the garage in a tone that made the word smaller than it was. She said it by bringing her son Marcus Reeves to every family gathering, and finding reasons to mention his salary, and his firm's ranking, and his corner office in Midtown. Deon noticed. He did not say much about it. He went home, and worked until the feeling settled. Diana noticed that he noticed. She did not say much either. That was the pattern they built. Noticing without naming. Living alongside the things that were easier not to say. They had 2 sons. Darius born when Deon was 31. Cole born when Deon was 35. Deon coached Darius in Little League for 4 seasons. He taught Cole to ride a bike in the driveway on a Saturday morning in October, running alongside him, until Cole said let go, and did not fall. 3 years after Darius was born, Diana suggested Deon open his own shop. She had done the numbers. Equity in the house. A small business loan was feasible. No independent full-service mechanic, within 4 miles of their neighborhood. She had a spreadsheet. She had projections. She was right about every figure. Deon opened Webb Automotive on Donald Lee Hollowell Parkway. Leased space, 4 bays, a waiting area, with 3 chairs, and a coffee maker. He worked 60 hours a week the first 2 years. By the 3rd year the shop was profitable. By the 5th year he had 3 technicians, and a 6-week waiting list for non-urgent work. Diana handled the books from the beginning. She was better at it than anyone he could have hired. She tracked every invoice, every parts order, every payroll cycle. She knew the shop's numbers better than Deon did on most weeks. He trusted her with that completely. There was no reason not to. In the 7th year of the business, Diana brought home a document. She said it was a restructuring of the ownership agreement for tax purposes. She said an accountant she had consulted recommended it. The document was a revised operating agreement for Webb Automotive LLC. She said the key change was adding her name, as a co-owner, with a 40% membership interest, which would allow them to file certain business taxes jointly, and reduce their combined liability. She had a number ready when he asked. The savings came to roughly $4,000 a year. Deon read the first 2 pages. The language was dense. Diana sat at the kitchen table, while he read, and answered his questions in the flat professional language she used, when she was explaining something she understood better than you did, which was not unkind, it was just how she talked about numbers. He asked her twice, if she was sure about the tax benefit. She said yes, twice, in the same tone. He signed. He did not know, until the divorce proceedings, that the accountant Diana mentioned had no connection to the document. He did not know that the operating agreement had been drafted by Raymond Holt, a family law attorney in Sandy Springs, whose specialty was not taxes. He did not know that Holt had been retained by Diana 7 months before that document appeared on the kitchen table. He did not know any of this, because he trusted his wife. Because trusting your wife is not a mistake. It is only a mistake when someone decides to use it. Diana had met Raymond Holt for the first time in Gloria's living room in Marietta on a Tuesday evening in February, 3 years before the papers arrived. Holt was 58 years old. He had handled 109 divorce cases in Georgia. He had never lost a property dispute. He wore the same dark navy suit in every meeting, and spoke slowly in a way that made every sentence sound like a conclusion rather than an opinion. Gloria had arranged the meeting. She had found Holt through a woman at her church, whose daughter had used him 5 years earlier, and walked away from a 22-year marriage, with the house, both cars, and a settlement that covered her mortgage for the next decade. Gloria had called him on a Monday, described the situation in careful language, and scheduled the meeting, without telling Diana, until the Thursday before. Diana had walked into her mother's living room expecting dinner. She found Holt sitting in the armchair by the window, with a leather portfolio on his knee. She did not walk out. That was the thing she would think about later. She sat down. She listened. She told herself she was just getting information. Holt told them he needed time and documentation. He said the strongest position required establishing Diana's individual financial identity before any filing occurred. He outlined what that meant in practice: a separate savings account at a different institution, transfers in amounts that would not draw attention in a monthly review, digital copies of all financial records in the household. He said the business was the most valuable asset, and the most complicated. He said he would need to understand the ownership structure before he could recommend a strategy. Gloria nodded through all of it. Diana sat with her hands in her lap. On the drive home she looked out the window, and did not speak. Gloria said she knew a property near Alpharetta that would be perfect once things were settled. Diana said nothing. Gloria did not notice. Diana opened the separate account the following month. The transfers were small and irregular, the way Holt had suggested. She photographed documents when Deon was at the shop, and sent them to a secure email address Holt provided. She did these things, and she also made breakfast every morning, and sat across from her husband at dinner, and listened to him talk about the shop, and asked questions that sounded like interest, because they were interest, or had been once, or she could no longer tell the difference. 7 months into this she brought home the operating agreement. 3 months after Deon signed it she told Holt it was done. Holt said good. He said they were making progress. He said she was being very smart about this. She did not feel smart. She felt like a person moving through a plan that had been designed by someone else, and that she had agreed to carry out, without fully reading the last few pages. The first sign Deon noticed was a Sunday in March, 2 years before the papers arrived. Diana came home from her mother's house quieter than usual. He asked if everything was all right. She said yes. She made dinner. She ate without talking. He did not push. That was the pattern. The second sign was 6 weeks later. Diana had always been up before him. Coffee made before he came downstairs. One morning he came down at 5:45, and the kitchen was dark. He stood in the dark kitchen, and made the coffee himself, and did not say anything about it. The third sign was a phone call he was not supposed to hear. He was in the garage on a Saturday afternoon, with the door open, working on a neighbor's truck. Diana was on the back porch. He caught her tone before he caught her words. Clipped. Careful. The voice of a person being precise about something they did not want to say wrong. He heard one sentence clearly before she went inside. He said we need the second set filed before the end of the month. He did not know what that meant. He did not ask. He went back under the hood. He told himself there was probably an explanation. He believed that because he needed to. He found out what it meant 8 months later, when the papers arrived. But that came after the birthday party. Diana's cousin Renata turned 40 in September, 14 months before the divorce filing. The party was held at a rented event space in Buckhead, 60 guests, a catered dinner, a playlist that started with 90s R&B and did not deviate. Deon wore a gray suit. Diana wore a green dress. They arrived together, and separated within 20 minutes the way couples do at family events, where one of them knows everyone, and the other knows their role. Deon was at the bar, when Gloria found him. She did not find him accidentally. He saw her cross the room in his direction, with the specific purpose of someone who has identified a target and planned an approach. She asked how the shop was doing. He said well. She nodded in the way, that means the answer has not landed where you hoped. She said she had heard that a new dealership service center was opening 2 miles from Hollowell Parkway in the spring. She said she imagined that would make things harder. She said it the way people say things that are not questions. Deon said he was not worried about it. Gloria looked at him for a moment. She said, "Deon, can I ask you something honestly?" He said yes. She said, "Have you ever thought about going back to school?" "Not mechanic school. A business degree. Something that would give you more options." She said Diana was still young enough to build towards something more stable, and it would help to have a partner who was building in the same direction. The room was full of people. Gloria said this in a normal conversational voice at the bar of her niece's 40th birthday party, with a glass of white wine in her hand, and a smile that did not waver. Marcus Reeves was standing 4 feet away. He had been there the whole time. He was talking to someone else, but he was not talking to someone else. He was listening. Deon saw his eyes move when Gloria said the words "more stable." Marcus did not do anything with what he heard. He turned back to the person he was with. He picked up his drink. He moved away. Deon looked at his mother-in-law. He said, "I think Diana and I are doing fine, Gloria." He said it quietly. He put his glass down. He walked away from the bar. Diana found him 20 minutes later on the terrace. She could see in his face that something had happened. She asked. He told her, briefly, what Gloria had said. Diana was quiet. She looked at the lights of Buckhead through the terrace glass, and did not look at him. She said, "I am sorry." She said she would talk to her mother. He said it was fine. They went back inside. Diana did not talk to her mother that night. Deon did not bring it up again. The pattern held. What Deon did not know was that Marcus had called Diana from the parking lot of the event space before they left. He had told her what he heard at the bar. Diana had said, "I know," and changed the subject. Marcus had let her change it. He had not forgotten what he heard. The papers arrived on a Thursday. Deon was in the driveway of the house on Sycamore Drive changing the oil on Diana's car, because she had mentioned it needed doing. He was on his back on a piece of cardboard when he heard a car slow at the curb. Footsteps. An envelope landed on the concrete beside his hand. He slid out. A man in a gray shirt was already walking back to his car. Deon picked up the envelope. He opened it, with hands that had oil on them, and left 2 dark fingerprints on the corner of the first page. He sat in the driveway, and read all 31 pages. Then he set them on the concrete. He sat for a while longer. He lowered Diana's car off the jack stand. He finished the oil change. He put the tools away. He did things in the order they needed doing, because that was what he knew how to do, when something broke, that he did not know how to fix. Holt had been building the case for 19 months by the time the papers arrived. He filed for primary custody on the grounds that Deon's 60-hour work weeks demonstrated an inability to provide consistent parental presence. He presented Diana's income as stable and predictable against Deon's fluctuating shop revenue. He presented the revised operating agreement, which gave Diana 40% individual ownership of Webb Automotive, as documentation of her independent business interest. He argued that the equity from the sale of Earl Webb's Halsted Street property had been deposited into the joint account during the marriage and constituted marital capital. On paper, Deon was a man who worked too much, owned less of his business than he believed, and had financed part of that business with money the court could argue belonged to both of them. The judge granted Diana temporary primary custody of Darius and Cole pending final proceedings. Deon packed one bag. He took his clothes. He took the toolbox. His hands went to it before he decided to reach for it. He carried it to the door. There was $412 in a checking account he had opened at 22, before Diana, before Atlanta. He had used it twice in a decade. The balance had sat untouched for 3 years. Holt had found the joint accounts, the business accounts, the investment account Diana had opened in her name 2 years into the marriage. He had found everything structured through Webb Automotive. He had searched for accounts tied to Diana's household records going back to their first joint filing. He had not found this one, because it predated their relationship, and had never appeared on any shared document. $412. The one account they missed. He walked out of the house on a Friday morning. 11 years in that house. The garage where he had done free oil changes for neighbors who could not afford the dealership. The driveway where Cole learned to ride a bike. He did not look back. Roosevelt Gaines was 67 years old. He had worked 2 bays down from Earl Webb at a shop on the west side of Chicago for 11 years, before moving to Atlanta in 1994. He was the man Earl had called when Deon got the Buckhead job offer, and Earl had asked Roosevelt to keep an eye on his son, without making it obvious. Roosevelt had kept that arrangement for 19 years. Monthly visits to the shop on Hollowell Parkway. Bad coffee and an opinion about alignment specs that was never correct. When Earl died of a stroke 7 years ago, Roosevelt had driven to Chicago for the funeral, and sat in the 3rd row, and said nothing to anyone, and came home, and called Deon once a week for 4 months. When Deon called him, from the driveway of the house on Sycamore Drive, Roosevelt said, "You know where I am." He drove over in 40 minutes. He put Deon's bag in the truck himself. Deon slept in the 2nd bedroom of Roosevelt's house on Campbellton Road. A single bed. A window facing the backyard. The toolbox went in the corner. The first 4 days he did not talk much. He sat on the back porch in the evenings and drank coffee that was better than what he made at home. Roosevelt did not push him. He knew what Deon looked like when he needed to work through something alone. On the 4th night Deon could not sleep. He lay on the single bed and stared at the ceiling and listened to a truck pass on Campbellton Road, and then silence. He sat up. He looked at the toolbox in the corner. He crossed the room and unlatched both sides. The lid came up. The smell reached him before anything else. Oil and metal and something underneath that he had stopped noticing years ago. He looked at the tools lined up the way his father had always kept them. Every handle. Every strip of white tape. Earl Webb. His father's name written in the same hand on every single piece. He picked up the torque wrench. He held it with both hands. He did not do anything with it. He just held it, and looked at the name on the tape, and sat on the floor in front of the open toolbox for a long time in the dark without moving. Then he put it back. He closed the lid. He latched both sides. In the morning he went out to Roosevelt's backyard, and looked at the Econoline. The van was a 2008 Ford Econoline Deon had bought 9 years earlier for $3,000, from an HVAC company upgrading its fleet. He had used it to haul parts and equipment in the early years of Webb Automotive. When the shop expanded he bought a proper cargo truck, and the Econoline sat behind the building. When the divorce proceedings began, and Holt's team inventoried Webb Automotive's assets, the Econoline appeared on the list. But Holt's paralegal ran the title, and found it registered not to Webb Automotive LLC, but to Deon L. Webb personally, in his legal name only, from the original purchase 9 years earlier. Deon had never transferred the title when the business grew. It was an oversight, the kind a man makes when he is building something, and not thinking about the legal structure of everything he owns. Holt's team flagged it. The paralegal noted in the file, personal vehicle, not LLC asset, title and individual name, likely excluded from business settlement. Holt reviewed it and made a calculation. The van was 9 years old, estimated value between $3,000 and $4,000. Pursuing a separate action to reclassify personal property would cost more in hours billed than the asset was worth. He moved on to the accounts and the real estate and the business interest, which together were worth several $100,000. He did not go back to the van. That was not an oversight. That was a lawyer deciding that $4,000 was not worth the paperwork. He was correct about the dollar amount. He was wrong about what the van would become. Roosevelt had towed it to his back lot when the shop changed management during the temporary settlement. It had sat there for 14 months under a piece of canvas. 2 flat tires. Rust along the wheel wells. A cracked side mirror. The vinyl lettering Deon had put on the side years ago, as a private joke, white letters on the panel. Earl's Mobile. His father's name on a van, that at the time was nothing. Deon looked at it for a while. Then he opened the toolbox. He spent 3 weeks on the van. He worked on it in the evenings, after putting in days at an oil change franchise on Metropolitan Parkway, that paid $14 an hour for a man who could rebuild an engine without a manual. He replaced the fuel pump with money from the old account. Battery. Serpentine belt. Radiator hoses gone brittle from sitting. He worked under a clip light, after dark on a rolling creeper, from Roosevelt's shed. The same setup as the garage on Halsted Street. Bare bulb. Concrete. His hands knowing what to do, before his mind finished telling them. Roosevelt brought coffee out at 9 every night. He did not offer to help. He understood that some repairs are meant to be done alone. On the 21st night Deon got in the driver's seat. He put the key in. He turned it. The engine started on the second try. He sat with it running, and listened to every sound it made, and knew which ones were fine, and which ones still needed attention. He put his hands on the steering wheel, and sat there. Roosevelt appeared at the passenger window. He looked at the temperature gauge climbing toward normal. He looked at Deon. He put his hand flat on the glass for a moment. Then he went back inside. Deon drove the van around the block and came back, and parked it, and sat with the engine off. The lettering was still on the side. Faded now, one corner of the E lifting from the panel. Earl's Mobile. He had put those letters on, as a joke. There was nothing funny about them now. There was just his father's name on a van, with an engine that ran. Registering Earl's Mobile as a sole proprietorship cost $41 at the Georgia Secretary of State's office. Roosevelt printed the form at the library on Campbellton Road. Deon paid the fee, with what was left in the old account, after the van repairs. He ordered 100 business cards. Black card, white lettering. Earl's Mobile. Mobile Auto Repair. Your location. A phone number. He put a stack in the van, and kept 20 in his wallet. He posted one photograph on Facebook. The van parked on Campbellton Road, the lettering visible on the panel. A caption that said, "If your car breaks down anywhere in Atlanta, and you need someone to come to you, call this number." Roosevelt shared it. 3 people Roosevelt knew shared it from there. The first call came on a Wednesday. A woman on Cascade Road, battery dead in a parking lot. Deon drove 22 minutes, jumped the battery, ran a diagnostic on the charging system, told her the alternator was marginal, and would need replacing, within 3 months. He charged her $60. She asked for a card. He gave her 2. Week 1, 4 calls. Week 2, 7. The numbers did not jump. They climbed the way things climb, when someone shows up on time, and does what they said they would do, and charges what they said they would charge. In a city where a tow alone cost $120, a man who came to you and fixed the problem on the spot for $80 was not something people kept to themselves. He tracked everything in a notebook. Date, location, problem, parts cost, labor charged, total. Money in on the left. Money out on the right. The same two columns his father had kept for 40 years in a spiral notebook on the workbench on Halsted Street. He did not miss a single night of writing in it. He called Darius and Cole every evening at 7:30. The custody arrangement allowed 2 weekday visits, and every other weekend. Deon drove to the house on Sycamore Drive, and sat on the front porch steps, with both boys, and helped Cole with homework and listened to Darius talk about school in the way 13-year-olds talk about school, in fragments and complaints, that were actually something else, if you knew how to hear them. One evening Cole said something, while they were eating on the porch steps. He said it the way 9-year-olds say things, which is directly, and without understanding the weight. "Dad," he said, "Mom's grandma says you fix cars on the street, because you could not hold onto a real job." Deon looked at his son. He was quiet for a moment. "What do you think?" he said. Cole thought about it seriously. "I think it is cool," Cole said. "I want to come sometime." Deon put his arm around him, and did not say anything else. The fourth week Earl's mobile hit a wall. A customer called on a Tuesday afternoon, engine overheating on I-285 near the Cascade exit. Deon drove out, diagnosed a blown head gasket. He had the tools. He did not have the parts. A head gasket kit for a 2016 Honda Accord cost $137 at the nearest parts supplier, and Deon had $62 in the Earl's mobile account, after that week's fuel costs. He called the customer back. He explained the situation directly, the way his father had always been direct about money. The customer said he would go to a shop instead. He was polite about it. He thanked Deon for coming out. Deon sat in the van on the shoulder of I-285 for about 10 minutes, after that call. Then he drove back to Roosevelt's house, and sat at the kitchen table, and looked at his notebook. Revenue on the left. Costs on the right. The gap between them was not a disaster. It was a constraint. He had been here before, not with a van on a highway shoulder, but in the early years of Webb Automotive, when a compressor failed, and he had to decide whether to fix it, or make payroll, and could not do both. He had learned then, that a constraint is not a ceiling, unless you decide to stop at it. He called 3 parts suppliers the next morning, and asked about net 30 accounts. 2 said no without explanation. The third, a family-owned distributor on Metropolitan Parkway named Barfield Auto Parts, asked him to come in. He drove over, with his business registration, his insurance certificate, and 3 months of bank statements, from the Earl's mobile account showing consistent deposits. A man named Curtis Barfield, 55 years old, who had been supplying independent mechanics in southwest Atlanta for 22 years, looked at the documents for a while and then looked at Deon. He said he recognized the name on the van. He said his brother-in-law had been a customer at Webb Automotive on Hollowell Parkway. He approved the account, with a $500 credit line, and a handshake, and said, "Do not make me regret it." Deon did not make him regret it. He paid every invoice, within 21 days for the next 6 months. Curtis extended the credit line to $2,000 in month 4, without being asked. The second obstacle was the weather. 3 days of rain in early October grounded the van. Mobile repair work done on public streets and parking lots is weather dependent in a way that shop work is not. Deon lost 3 scheduled calls in 4 days. He sat in Roosevelt's kitchen and ran the numbers, and found that 1 bad weather week could erase 2 good weeks of margin. He called the customers who had canceled. He rescheduled all 3. He also started doing something he had not planned to do. He called customers who had used Earl's mobile and asked if they had indoor parking at their home or workplace where he could work on covered days. 4 of them did. 1 had a garage he offered freely. Another had a covered parking deck at her office building, and permission from building management. He added a note to the Facebook page. Covered location calls available on request. It was not a solution to weather. It was an adaptation. His father had adapted his whole career. You adjust the approach when the conditions change. The job is the same. The third obstacle came from an unexpected direction. A mechanic named Gary Tillman, who ran a two-bay shop on Benjamin E. Mays Drive, began telling customers that Earl's Mobile was unlicensed and operating without proper insurance. He told this to at least 4 people that Deon knew of, because 3 of them called to ask, and 1 posted the question on the Earl's Mobile Facebook page, where it sat publicly for 11 hours, before Roosevelt saw it. Deon called Tillman directly. Not to argue. He said he understood competition, and he respected it, and he wanted to clear something up. He told Tillman the business registration number, and the insurance policy carrier, and said he was happy to share both documents, if Tillman wanted to see them. Tillman said nothing for a moment. Then he said he was just looking out for customers. Deon said he appreciated that and that the best way to look out for customers was to be accurate. He ended the call. He posted the business registration number and insurance carrier information on the Facebook page that afternoon. Patricia reviewed the post and said it was appropriate and that the documentation was solid. The comment thread under the post turned into 37 people recommending Earl's Mobile to other people. Tillman did not call again. Gloria had been talking. Not to anyone official. To family. To her church circle. To the neighbor on her street, who had a long memory and a wide network. She described Deon's situation in the language of a woman who had predicted this outcome and was being careful not to say so. She said it was a shame. She said some men just did not know how to adapt. She did not mention Holt. She did not mention the Tuesday evening in her living room or the document that appeared on Deon's kitchen table. She mentioned the van. She mentioned the street corners. The Sunday dinner happened 6 weeks after the separation. Gloria hosted it at her house in Marietta the way she hosted it every month, 12 people around a long table, good food, the kind of gathering where the warmth is real and the undercurrents are real, and both things are true at the same time. Deon was not invited. That was expected. What was not expected was that Diana brought the boys, and that Gloria had also invited her neighbor Howard, and Howard's wife Patricia, who knew Deon through a church connection, and that Howard asked Diana in the middle of the meal, as naturally as asking about the weather, how Deon was getting on with his little roadside business. The table went quiet in the specific way tables go quiet when a question has landed that everyone wishes had not been asked. Gloria answered before Diana could. She said Deon was doing what he could with what he had. She said it with the particular tenderness that contains no tenderness at all. She said some people find their level, and you have to respect that even when it is not what you hoped for them. She said it while passing the bread. Howard nodded. Patricia looked at her plate. Darius was 13, and had been listening to everything. He looked at his grandmother across the table, with the flat expression of a teenager who has decided not to say the thing he is thinking. He picked up his fork and went back to his food. Cole had not followed the conversation fully. He looked at Darius, then at his mother, then at his plate. Diana said, "Mom." One word. The way you say a name when you want someone to stop, without starting an argument at the table. Gloria smiled and changed the subject to something about the church renovation. Darius told Deon about it the following Wednesday on the porch steps. He told it the way teenagers tell things, compressed, factual, without editorializing. He said, "Grandma said something about you at dinner Sunday." Deon asked what she said. Darius repeated it word for word. Some people find their level, and you have to respect that even when it is not what you hoped for them. He said it in Gloria's cadence, which was accurate, and which was not kind. Deon sat with that for a moment. He looked at Darius. He said, "What do you think?" Darius looked at the street. He said, "I think she does not know what you are building." Deon put his hand on his son's shoulder, and did not say anything else. He did not call Gloria. He did not call Diana. He drove back to Roosevelt's house, and sat in the backyard, and looked at the van, and thought about his father, who had spent 40 years being called a mechanic by people who meant it as a ceiling. Earl had never tried to correct them. He had just kept working. The work was the argument. You did not make it in words. Marcus heard some of what Gloria was saying. He heard it at a family dinner 6 weeks after the separation, when Gloria described the situation to an aunt, with the calm specificity of someone giving a prepared statement. Marcus sat at the other end of the table, and did not say anything. He remembered what he had heard at Renata's birthday party. He remembered Diana's voice on the phone saying, "I know," and changing the subject. He filed all of it somewhere in his mind, and went home, and did not sleep well. He started calling Diana more often after that. Not to ask about Deon. To ask about her. He asked how she was doing, not as a greeting, but as a real question, and he waited for a real answer. Diana gave him partial answers. She said she was fine. She said it was complicated. She said she was trusting the process. Marcus said, "Whose process?" Diana did not answer that one. Deon filed a motion for joint custody of Darius and Cole in the 5th month. His lawyer was Patricia Osei, 34 years old, family law in Decatur, deliberate in the way of someone who has learned that preparation is the only thing that closes the gap between a smaller budget and a larger one. She had reviewed the Earl's mobile registration, the van title, the old account statements, and the operating agreement. She had a theory about the operating agreement. She had not yet found a way to prove it. Holt filed the response within 8 days. He moved quickly, because he had been moving for 19 months, and was not going to slow down now. He also filed a supplemental motion arguing that Earl's Mobile was a continuation of Webb Automotive, and that its revenue should be considered income from a disputed asset pending the final business settlement. Patricia filed the response to the supplemental motion in 6 days. She argued that Earl's Mobile had been established after the separation using funds from an account predating the marriage, using a vehicle titled in Deon's personal name, using tools that were personal property inherited from his father's estate, and that no contested marital asset had been used in its formation. She submitted the account opening date from 2005. She submitted the van title. She submitted the toolbox in the form of photographs, every tool, every strip of tape, every instance of Earl Webb written in black marker. The motion to classify Earl's Mobile as a marital asset was denied. Holt appealed. The appeal took 6 weeks, and cost Diana $4,100 in additional fees. She read the invoice, and sat with it at the kitchen table for a long time. She was very good at understanding what numbers meant. She was beginning to understand what these numbers meant. Diana had her first clear moment of doubt on a Thursday evening 5 months into the proceedings, not because of anything dramatic, but because of something small. Cole had asked her to help him with a homework assignment about family history. He wanted to know what his grandfather Earl had done for work. Diana told him Earl had been a mechanic. Cole asked where. Diana said Chicago. He had his own garage. Cole said, like Dad's shop. Diana said, yes, like Dad's shop. Cole wrote it down in his notebook, satisfied. He moved on to the next question. Diana sat at the kitchen table, after Cole went to bed, and thought about that exchange for a long time. She thought about the operating agreement. She thought about what she had signed, and what she had allowed Deon to sign, and what he had believed when he signed it. She thought about the word like. Like Dad's shop. A thing that had existed, because Deon had built it the way Earl had built his, from the ground up, with his hands, over years. She had written the projections for that shop. She had tracked every invoice for 7 years. She had watched it grow, from a leased 4-bay space, into something that supported a family. She knew exactly what it had taken. She did not call Holt that night. She called Marcus. She did not tell him what she was thinking. She asked him how he was. He said fine. She said good night, and ended the call, and sat in the kitchen a while longer. She started reading the billing invoices more carefully after that. Holt sent them monthly. Diana had been approving them, without detailed review, the way you approve things prepared by a professional you have engaged to handle something you do not want to think about too carefully. She started reading line by line. Strategy consultation. Document preparation. Research and analysis. Asset valuation review. She calculated the hours. She calculated what those hours had purchased. She thought about what $4,100 for an appeal on a van worth $4,000 meant in terms of whose interests were actually being served. She called Holt the week the appeal was denied. She asked him a direct question. She asked him whether the operating agreement he had drafted had been presented to Deon as a tax document on his advice. Holt was quiet for a moment. He said the strategy had been developed in consultation with her and with her interests in mind. Diana said that was not what she asked. Holt said he would not recommend revising their approach at this stage. Diana said thank you and ended the call. She sat in the kitchen of the house on Sycamore Drive for a while after that. She thought about a Tuesday evening in her mother's living room, and a leather portfolio, and a man who spoke in conclusions. She thought about signing documents that other people had explained to her. She thought about what it felt like to be on the receiving end of a plan you had not fully read before you agreed to it. She did not call Deon. Not yet. She did not know what she would say. She called Marcus instead. Marcus picked up on the second ring. She told him about the call with Holt. She told him what Holt had said when she asked about the operating agreement. She was quiet for a moment after that. Marcus was quiet too. Then he said, "Diana, how much of this did you actually decide for yourself?" She did not answer immediately. She looked at the kitchen window. She said, "I do not know anymore." The custody hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday in September at the Fulton County Superior Court on Pryor Street. Judge Calvin Morris presiding. Before the hearing, Holt sent a formal letter to Patricia's office requesting documentation of all Earl's mobile revenue, all communications between Deon and any media contacts, and a complete accounting of how the $400 account had been used. Patricia complied with the legally required disclosures, and noted in her response that the request suggested the petitioner was continuing to monitor the respondent's business activities despite the prior ruling. That letter was entered into the record. Deon sat on one side of the courtroom on a Tuesday morning. Diana sat on the other. They did not look at each other. Holt went first. He laid out 6 months of Earl's mobile revenue, and called it inconsistent. He noted that Deon had been living in another man's home for the first 3 months following the separation. He described Earl's mobile as an informal mobile operation rather than an established business. He presented Deon's work schedule, 7 in the morning to 9 at night on active days, and argued that this demonstrated unavailability as a parent. He framed every document the same way. Instability. A man without a fixed location. A man without a permanent business address. A man who had lost his shop and was improvising on street corners. He did not submit the business registration. He did not submit the insurance policy. He did not submit the vendor license, or the certified parts supplier accounts, or the equipment purchases. He did not submit any of these, because submitting them would make Deon look like what he was, a business owner. Patricia went second. She submitted 6 months of self-employment tax filings, revenue increasing each month without exception. She submitted the lease agreement for a studio apartment on Fairburn Road signed 3 weeks before the hearing, Deon's name on it, stable address confirmed. She submitted the Earl's mobile business registration, sole proprietorship, state of Georgia, established with personal funds, from a premarital account. She submitted the insurance policy, and the parts supplier accounts, and the portable diagnostic equipment receipts. Then she submitted the letters. 22 of them, handwritten on different papers in different hands. Customers who had used Earl's mobile, and written down what that had meant. A woman whose car had died at 11 at night, and who had a man arrive in 23 minutes, and fix it, and refused to leave, until she had started the engine herself, and pulled away safely. A retired teacher named Evelyn Carter, who had written 6 careful sentences, that ended with, "I have lived in this city for 40 years, and I have never once had a service person show up the way this man showed up." And one letter from Roosevelt Gaines. 67 years old, knew Earl Webb for 11 years, and Deon Webb for 19. The letter said one thing, that none of Holt's language about instability could touch. It said, "I have watched this man work every single day, since he arrived at my house, with one bag and a toolbox. I have watched him call his sons at 7:30 every evening, without missing a night. I have watched him pay for his own tools, and his own parts, and his own coffee, and ask for nothing he did not earn. That is the man these children have for a father." Patricia then addressed the operating agreement directly. She had subpoenaed Holt's billing records for Webb Automotive. She submitted 3 invoices showing Holt had billed Diana for work described as business entity restructuring consultation in the months before the operating agreement was signed. She submitted an email from Holt's office to Diana's personal account, sent 4 months before the document appeared on Deon's kitchen table, with the subject line "Revised Operating Agreement Draft for Review." She submitted Diana's reply to that email, which contained 2 questions about language in Section 4, and a request to adjust the effective date. She submitted Holt's response with the adjustments made. The operating agreement Deon had signed, as a tax document, had been drafted by a divorce attorney, reviewed by Diana, revised at her request, and delivered to Deon, with an explanation that did not include the word divorce, or the name Raymond Holt. Patricia said, this document was not a tax strategy. It was prepared by opposing counsel 19 months before this filing, as part of a deliberate plan to establish an individual property interest for the petitioner in the respondent's business. The respondent was not informed of the document's origin, or its actual purpose. He signed it in good faith based on a false representation made by his wife. Judge Morris looked at the documents. He looked at both tables. He looked at Patricia. He looked at Holt for a long time. He asked if either party had additional witnesses. Patricia said yes. The courtroom door opened. Marcus Reeves walked in. Diana turned in her chair. She looked at her brother. Marcus walked to the front of the courtroom and took the witness stand. Patricia asked Marcus to state his relationship to both parties. Marcus said he was Diana's older brother. He said he had been present for a conversation between Diana and their mother Gloria in the months before the divorce filing, in which Gloria had described the strategy and timeline in specific terms. He said he had heard Gloria refer to Holt by name on at least 2 occasions in Diana's presence. He said he had been present at a family event where Gloria had made remarks to Deon about his career that Marcus would characterize as designed to make Deon feel that he was not considered a legitimate provider by the family. Patricia asked if Marcus had raised these observations with Diana. Marcus said yes. He said he had called Diana from the parking lot of the event venue that night and told her what he had heard at the bar. He said Diana had responded by saying, "I know." He said he had not pursued it further at the time. He said he had spent the following months asking himself why he had not. Patricia asked Marcus what had changed. Marcus said Diana had called him after speaking with Holt about the operating agreement. He said she had asked him whether he thought she had made her own decisions in this process. He said that question had stayed with him for 3 weeks. He said he was in the courtroom because the answer he had come to was no, she had not entirely, and because her children deserved someone to say that plainly. Patricia submitted the text message thread between Marcus and Diana from the night of the birthday party. 12 messages. Timestamps. Marcus's message reading, "I heard what Gloria said to Deon at the bar." Diana's response, "I know." A follow-up from Marcus 3 days later asking if she was all right. Diana's response, "It is complicated." The thread ending there for 4 months, until Diana called him after the Holt conversation. Holt rose and said he had objections. Judge Morris said he would consider them. He looked at the witness stand. He looked at Diana's table. Diana was looking at the table surface. Judge Morris closed the folder in front of him. He said he found the billing records and the email chain submitted by the respondent's counsel to be significant. He said the record suggested that the petitioner had participated in the preparation of a document used to alter the respondent's business ownership under false pretenses, and that this conduct was relevant to the court's assessment of both parties' fitness and credibility. He said he also found the testimony of Marcus Reeves credible and consistent with the documentary evidence. He said that the respondent had demonstrated 6 months of consistent and increasing income, stable housing confirmed, and parental engagement documented, without a single gap in the record. He said the petitioner's legal strategy had relied substantially on characterizing that income as unstable, while simultaneously attempting to classify the business generating that income as a marital asset, which the court had already rejected. Primary custody, he said, is hereby granted to the father effective in 14 days. The mother retains visitation rights on a schedule to be determined within 30 days. He called the next case. Deon walked out of the courtroom and stood on the steps in the September air. He took out his phone. He called Darius. "Your brother and you are coming home." He said it quietly. Darius was quiet on the line for a moment. Then he said, "Okay, Dad." 2 months before the hearing, on a Friday night in July, Deon had gotten a call at 11:17. A woman named Evelyn Carter, 63 years old, retired teacher, car dead at a 4-way stop on Cascade Road. She had found Earl's mobile in her phone, because a neighbor had mentioned it once, and she had saved the number, without being sure why. Deon was in Roosevelt's kitchen finishing a late dinner. He looked at the address. He covered his plate and put it in the refrigerator. He picked up the toolbox and went out to the van. He found Evelyn Carter standing beside a 2014 Camry, with her hazard lights going, and her hands folded, because she did not know what else to do with them. He pulled up behind her. He got out. He introduced himself. He asked her to try starting the car, while he listened. "Fuel pump," he said after 60 seconds. He had a compatible pump in the van. He had started carrying common parts 2 months into the business, because he had learned which repairs come up most at 11 at night on the side of a road. He replaced the pump in 38 minutes. He told her the total. She said she only had $40 in her wallet. He said that was fine, and to drive safe. She Venmo'd him $40 the next morning, with a note that said, "I have never had anyone show up like that in my life." Her daughter was Kezia Carter. 31 years old, community affairs producer at a television station on Peachtree Street. She had been developing a series on small businesses in black communities across Atlanta that provided essential services and remained functionally invisible to the broader economy. She called Deon on a Monday morning. Explained who she was. Said her mother had told her what happened on Cascade Road. Said she wanted to feature Earl's mobile. Deon listened. He said he needed to think about it. He almost said no. That was the part that did not make the segment. He sat on Roosevelt's back porch that night and thought about what it would mean to be on television, while a custody hearing was 37 days away, and Holt was already looking for angles. He called Patricia. She said it was his decision, and that the court would see what it saw. He sat with that for 2 more days. He called Roosevelt. He told him about the offer. Roosevelt was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What would your daddy say?" Deon looked at the toolbox sitting by the back door, where he always left it, when he came in. He called Kezia the next morning. Kezia and a 2-person crew arrived at Roosevelt's back lot at 5:45 on a Thursday morning. Deon was already at the van, with the hood up checking fluids. He did not look at the camera. He worked the way he worked every morning. He opened the toolbox. He ran a diagnostic on a neighbor's car Roosevelt had arranged for the shoot. He crouched beside the neighbor and explained what he found in the same way Earl had always explained things, without condescension, without rushing, pointing and saying, "Here is what happened, and here is why, and here is what I am going to do about it." They followed him through the morning. They filmed him on Cascade Road, where he parked, because that was where Evelyn Carter had called from. They filmed him at a call in East Atlanta, where a man's alternator had failed, and Deon replaced it on the street in 44 minutes, while the man stood beside him watching and asking questions that Deon answered, without stopping work. Between calls, Kezia interviewed him in the van. He sat on the step of the open rear cargo door, with a cup of coffee. He told her he started with $400, and a van that did not run, and a toolbox his father had used for 31 years. He did not say Diana's name. He did not describe the divorce. He did not say what was taken from him or how it was done. I lost the shop, he said. I lost the building. I did not lose what I know how to do. Kezia asked him about the toolbox. He reached over and opened it. The tools were arranged the way Earl had always kept them. The camera moved close. Earl Webb. 2 words on every handle. These are your father's tools, Kezia said. Deon said, he left me everything I needed. Kezia interviewed Evelyn Carter. She looked at the camera and said, my car was broken, and it was dark, and I was scared, and this man came and fixed it, and would not let me pay him properly, and told me to drive safe. She paused. That is all, she said. But that was everything. The segment aired on a Wednesday evening. Prime time. 9 minutes. The title card read, Earl's Mobile. One man, $400, and a toolbox. Within 48 hours the phone did not stop. The Facebook page Roosevelt had made went from 600 followers to 19,000. 180,000 views in the first week. 3 other stations requested the footage. People who did not know Atlanta shared it, with one sentence underneath. This is what it looks like when someone does not quit. Diana saw the segment in the living room of the house on Sycamore Drive. She heard the name and looked up. She saw the van. She saw the toolbox. She had seen that toolbox in the corner of every room she had shared with Deon for 11 years. She had stopped seeing it the way you stop seeing things that are always there. Now it was on television, and a camera was moving slowly across it, and she could read the tape on every handle, and read her former husband's father's name. She heard Deon say, he left me everything I needed. She sat in the living room for a long time, after the segment ended. She did not change the channel. She thought about a Tuesday evening in her mother's house, and a man, with a leather portfolio, who spoke in conclusions. She thought about signing documents she had not fully read in rooms, where the conversation was already moving, before she finished the page. She thought about Cole asking her 2 months, after Deon moved out, when his dad's shop was going to reopen. She had said she did not know, and looked out the window, when she said it. She thought about what Marcus had asked her on the phone. How much of this did you actually decide for yourself? She had been carrying that question for 3 months, without an answer that felt true. Watching the segment, she found one. Not the answer she had been hoping for. Just the one that was accurate. She called Holt the next morning, and told him she was revising her position on custody. Holt said that was inadvisable given the hearing timeline. Diana said she understood. She said she was revising it anyway. The court filing became public record the week after the hearing. The billing records and email chain were referenced in the determination. The pattern of document misrepresentation was described in legal language that anyone who read it would understand. Gloria did not speak to Marcus for 4 months. She did not speak to Diana for 3 weeks, and when she did it was to say that Diana had made a mistake she would spend years correcting. Diana listened to all of it. Then she said, I hear you, and ended the call. It was the first time in 41 years she had ended a call with her mother, before her mother was finished talking. It did not feel like victory. It felt like standing up, after a long time on the floor. Holt sent his final invoice to Diana. $53,000. 19 months of preparation, filing fees, hearing appearances, the failed motion to classify Earl's mobile, the appeal, the supplemental filings, all billed at $425 an hour. Diana had a degree in accounting. She understood exactly what $53,000 meant in hours, and in decisions, and in a direction she had allowed someone else to set. She paid it. She did not call Holt again. The first evening Darius and Cole came to the apartment on Fairburn Road was a Thursday in late October. Deon had moved a second mattress into the bedroom that morning and put clean sheets on both beds. He set the small table by the window, with 3 plates, and 3 glasses, and 3 forks. He left the toolbox open on the kitchen counter the way his father had always left it open in the garage on Halsted Street. Not for any particular reason. Just because it had always been open, when work was happening. He cooked the way Roosevelt cooked, when Deon came home late. Simple. Serious. Chicken and rice, and something on the side, that required attention. He cooked the way his father had always fixed cars. Without rushing. Without shortcuts. Letting the work do what the work does, when you give it the time it needs. Cole came in first. He walked straight to the toolbox on the counter. He had seen it his whole life in the corner of his father's garage, and had never paid it attention. He looked inside. He reached in, with both hands, and lifted the torque wrench. "Dad," he said. "What does this one do?" Deon showed him. He stood beside his son, and explained how to hold it, and what it measured, and when you used it, and when you did not. Cole listened the way 9-year-olds listen, when they are genuinely interested, which is completely, with no part of them somewhere else. Cole put the wrench back carefully. He looked at the tape on the handle. He touched the letters with one finger. "Who is Earl Webb?" he said. "That is your grandfather," Deon said. "Those are his tools." Cole looked at the toolbox for a moment longer. He looked up at his father. "Anything broken can be fixed, right?" he said. The way children say things they know, without knowing where they learned them. Deon looked at his son. "Where did you hear that?" he said. Cole shrugged. "I just know it." They sat down. Darius was already at the table. He had not said much, since he arrived, which was how Darius was, which was how Deon had always been, the kind of quiet that is not absence but attention. They sat in the particular silence of people who do not need to fill it, because it is not empty. Cole ate for a while and then looked up. "This is good, Dad," he said. "Can I come with you in the van sometime?" Deon looked at his sons. He looked at the toolbox open on the counter, his father's name on every handle in the same black ink, 31 years of repairs on every single piece. He looked at Darius eating quietly, and watching the street, through the window the way Deon had always watched things, carefully, from the side. "You can come Monday," he said. Diana did not take everything from Deon Webb. She took what Holt put in front of her, and signed where she was shown, and followed a road her mother had mapped, before she understood the destination. The toolbox was not on the list. The $400 account was not on the list. The van was on the list, but came off it, when a paralegal read the title, and a senior attorney did the math, and decided the paperwork was not worth the asset. They were right about the dollar amount. They missed everything else. Here is the question, and there is no clean answer to it. Cole is 9 years old. One day he will be old enough to ask what happened during the years he was too young to understand. He will ask about the apartment on Fairburn Road, and the single mattress, and why his father fixed cars on the street instead of in the shop on Hollowell Parkway. He will ask about his mother. He will ask about those years in the voice of someone who needs an explanation that is honest, without being a weapon. If you were Deon Webb, what would you tell your son, and when would you decide he was old enough to hear it? Leave your answer below. Subscribe. I will see you in the next one.
If this story reminded you of someone who showed up for you when nobody else did, send it to them right now. They probably do not hear it often enough, And if you are still watching, drop a comment and tell me what time it is, where you are, and where in the world you are from.
Hit subscribe and turn on the bell because tomorrow's story is one you simply cannot miss. See you in the next one.